Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Implementing Adaptation for Resilient Mediterranean Climate Regions. I have to apologize for my voice. I'm a little bit froggy today. Today, we're going to have a conversation about the ways that subnational governments can learn from each other as we move towards adaptation solutions. Subnational participation in international climate agreements is a critical discussion that's been happening every day at COP22. And we aim to take it a step further by showing how this can be accomplished on the ground and how collaboration across borders can help cities thrive. My name is Laurel Hunt, and I'm the Secretary of the Mediterranean City Climate Change Consortium Secretariat, which we call MC4. MC4 is an adaptation network with resources for climate leaders in cities in the 5 Mediterranean regions. Today we're going to hear opening remarks, and then I'll give a short introduction to the 5 regions, and then we'll hear from our fantastic panel of experts. So I'm proud to welcome our panelists who have traveled across the world and who represent a variety of backgrounds and experiences. So for the opening remarks today, it is my great pleasure to introduce Ms. Yael Cohen Paran. Yael is a member of the 20th Knesset, representing the Zionist Union, and is the first ever Green member of Knesset. She's a member of the committees and is the chair of a parliamentary subcommittee promotion of renewable energy technologies and implementing the Paris Agreement. Yael was the co-chairperson of the Green Movement Party and is the founding executive director of the Israel Energy Forum, the premier non-governmental organization promoting sustainable energy in Israel. Yael has been an environmental leader for the past 20 years. In the late 1990s, she was one of the students who established Green Course, an activist organization, and was appointed executive director. In this capacity, she led Green Course to become one of the largest and most influential environmental organizations in Israel today. So please join me in welcoming Yael to the podium.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Laurel, for the very profound introduction. Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here and very glad to be here as a member of Knesset, as I've been part of dealing with climate change from civil society in the past nearly 20 years and dealing with clean energy and climate change and attending the COP conventions in the last 10 years as a civil society organization representative, but now and also last year as a Knesset member. It is really an honor for me to be here this morning. I would like to welcome you all and to welcome the distinguished speakers that came really from all over the world, from Israel, from the US, and this morning, this side event is about is collaboration between the U.S. and Israeli experts and official and government officials that really presents how Israel can show, well, not only Israel, but in this case, Israel can show how it presents and how it can collaborate with the rest of the world to work on climate change solutions and adaptation for mitigation. So I think that I can say today that I have a unique perspective on how politicians see the climate change issue. And I think maybe as opposed to how scientists and the environmentalists that are deep in this issue see it and live the issue on a daily basis, I can tell you that politicians unfortunately don't. And I hope I will not let anyone down if I tell you that, unfortunately, climate change is not top of the news. Not only in Israel, I guess, but especially in Israel, but I guess also in other countries. But I think it should be. And maybe in this room, it is quite obvious why I think it should be. I think it is really one of the most devastating things that it is not. And it will change the world. It will change the world as we know it for the future generation, but it is also changing the world today. And I think that as someone who comes from seeing how this issue is unfortunately not on top of the agenda, we have to see how we go, me as a public representative, but also all of us here in this room, in this convention, how we go to our people, how we go back to our countries, and see how we show them that this is their interest, it's each and every one of us interest to create a change, because this is affecting our lives right here and right now already. Now, if you look at one of the issues that are on top of the world agenda, on top of the public debate, creating huge political changes, the issue of refugees. Now, I believe that these issues are really strongly connected, and there is science behind this saying, but I don't think it is phrased enough in this sense. All of us have been talking in previous 10 years about how much the climate change will create problems, will create a scarcity of water and droughts, that will create a scarcity of food, create vulnerable areas and refugees coming from this area. Well, this is already happening, but in the public debate, in the political debate, the refugees are seeing on their own like an external problem with no context. But I believe there is a context, and the context is here, and right now it's the issue we are here discussing in Marrakesh. But I'm afraid the public does not hear about it enough, doesn't know about the connection between those two issues. And I think it's our role to bring this up. The Marrakesh Convention we are here is dealing with the implementation of the Paris Agreement, and it is truly a surprise that it passed, that it became in force just a few days before the convention convened. And already it's known, and it's been discussed here in a few panels, I'm sure in many of them, that even if all the countries will fulfill their obligations, the current obligations, we are not going to meet the Paris Agreement goals. So this is something we have to say and cry out loud. I'm here as a representative of the parliament, and all of you from your different places, whether you're government or public representatives or civil society or expert, this is something we should reflect to all our governments and say we should do more, we should take more serious obligations, because we have to meet at least with the Paris Agreement goals. Only last week in the Knesset, we had a session of the committee that I'm heading about following up the Israeli commitments and implementation of the Paris Agreement obligations. And I have to say that although I will always have criticism, but I think that the government in Israel is starting to do a good job, and all the ministries that show their programs and how they are, the pace they are advancing them, there was quite satisfactory. And we have a lot still to do, but I think that the fact that Israel is putting nearly $1 billion shekel in promoting energy efficiency and moving on this whole business, this whole market of energy efficiency, whether in the industrial sector, in the business sector, in local municipality, for project in the next 4 years. And we see that renewable energy is moving forward, and Israel is really changing tremendously its energy mix from coal towards natural gas, which is still fossil fuel, but much cleaner, with much less pollution and much less greenhouse gas emissions, as we all know. And a big decision was just made, and this is really thanks to a very tremendous work done by the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Energy, that was convinced that we can do without 4 coal power plants, and we are going to close them hopefully in less, but right now the decision is that in 5 or 6 years they will be closed. 4 out of 10 power plants that are operating in coal today in Israel, the decision was made to close them, to shut them down, and to build a natural gas power plant instead, which is more than half of the CO2 emissions to be reduced. So Israel really has most wonderful technologies. in many aspects that has to do with climate change, both mitigation and adaptation, like water technology, water saving technologies, and agriculture. Really the best, the top of the edge agriculture research is done in Israel. We have a lot to show the world, and I think Israel can and should lead the world in a lot of sense in new technologies introduction to fight climate change, to meet the challenges that adaptation is requiring. Last but not least, I would like to emphasize the importance of cities, and this is very much in the discussion here today in dealing with climate change. Cities has been the source of the problem, but as you all know, more than 50% of the people in the world live in cities today, and cities are seen as very polluting. But this is also the source of the solution. This is the way I see it. With the right urban planning, with the right technologies, we can turn our cities to much better, more efficient, smart cities. This has been discussed much in Israel on academic spheres, also in the Knesset. I think this is something that the whole world is beginning to adopt. And even in Israel, the first to adopt any voluntary goals on climate issue were the Forum of 15 Cities, which is the biggest cities in Israel, that already in 2008 signed on a commitment to reduce climate change, Cities for Climate Action commitment, to reduce CO2 emissions by 20% in 2020. That even precedented the government obligations that only came after Copenhagen in 2009, 2010. So I think this is an example of how cities can move, can push the national governments, and in the cities we have maybe the problem, but we can create the solution. So I would like to conclude to say that there is a true feeling, I feel it, that we are on the beginning of the wave of change, of clean energy, and the world is really opening up, and more than 90% of all new energy infrastructure is renewable energy. And we see a lot of financing going into this, but we really have to be here in Marrakesh to make sure that we do put the right policy in place. We have to work back in our home to make sure our governments follow up the policy, because we owe it to ourselves, to our children, and to the future generation to work on this as hard as we could. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yael. I'm going to do a little bit of framing before we move into the panel. So as Yael just said, cities are home to an increasing majority of the world's population. I'm sure you know that. This includes mega cities through small cities. And so the decisions that urban regions make on adaptation measures will determine the extent to which climate change impacts human well-being. National conferences and plans are engaging and important, clearly, since we're here. But mayors and urban stakeholders will also make many of the decisions on the ground that matter. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change underscores the urgency of climate adaptation in its latest report and breaks it down broadly into 3 categories, which you can read there. The critical point is that for cities, creative adaptation while living within limits is the key. How do we keep the lights on, keep people employed, and emissions down? So there are 5 Mediterranean climate regions in the world. They're relatively small areas that are widely dispersed at roughly the same latitude on both sides of the equator. These regions include California, central Chile, the Cape region of South Africa, southwestern Australia, and the region bordering the Mediterranean Sea. The Mediterranean climate, which is moderated by cold ocean currents offshore, is characterized by hot, dry summers and mild, rainy winters. So these ecosystems cover just under 3% of the Earth's land area, but they contain about 20% of its plant biodiversity, including over 26,000 endemic species. In fact, outside of the wet tropics, Mediterranean ecosystems have the highest levels of plant biodiversity in the world. At the same time, major cities in these regions like Los Angeles, Barcelona, Casablanca, Cape Town, Melbourne, you name it, are home to over 250 million people. These are densely populated and critically important cities, cultural and intellectual centers, tourist destinations, and economic drivers. These 5 Mediterranean regions share certain characteristics. For example, many are major coastal cities like Santiago and Athens. Also, the attractive climate means that there are some similar economic drivers. They tend to be tourist destinations that earn export revenues for their countries. And the stressor of climate change, when you add it in, you get some of these similarities. All the cities are running out of water, confronting new fire management concerns, trying to develop sustainable industry and resource use, and losing natural habitat to agriculture. Here we can see some climate change impacts on Mediterranean cities by sector. For example, for biodiversity and open space, a changing climate means shifts in habitat, natural disturbances, species invasions, and impacts on recreational resources, among others. This is obviously an abbreviated diagram. The similarities between these cities bring us together as a research base. But what's really interesting are the differences. For example, as one of our MC4 members, Dr. Felicia Federico, pointed out, differences between regions has served to enhance comparative studies, leading to insights into resource management, including post-fire regrowth, vegetation type change, and invasive species control. Also, another MC4 member, Dr. Bo Cutter, demonstrates in his work that cooperation between areas with different levels of development can be beneficial. Lower income countries can capitalize on leapfrog development and can test new technologies at lower cost and with greater regulatory flexibility. This is just as important as being able to leverage our similarities. MC4, the network that I run out of the Center for Urban Resilience at Loyola Marymount University, supports partners for climate solutions within ecologically similar regions. We're a region-focused coalition bringing together business and policy leaders, as well as academics and other professionals. The urban hubs that we support, like Los Angeles, Barcelona, Adelaide, are leading the way in developing innovative approaches in fields as varied as water supply, alternative energy development, green infrastructure design, and human health risk management. The MC4 Secretariat provides learning opportunities by sponsoring collaborative projects, webinars, workshops, conferences. And now I'm going to introduce our first speaker. There we go. Dr. Sinaia Netanyahu is the chief scientist in Israel's Ministry of Environmental Protection. Her office supports academic and applied environmental research, such as waste to energy and alternative fuels, among others. She is also responsible for advising the minister, the director general, and the ministry divisions on scientific, technological, and strategic matters. Sinaia is a member of the following board of directors and councils: the Oil Council, the National Company for the Protection of the Coastal Cliff, the National Bioethics Council, the Council for Advancing Women in Science, and the Public Statistics Council. She served as a lecturer in both Ben-Gurion University and the Hebrew University, and was the director of environmental sustainable finance at Tahal Group. So let's welcome Sinaia to the podium.
Okay, good afternoon. So my name is Sinan. As it was said, I'm the chief scientist at the Ministry of Environmental Protection of the State of Israel. And among other things, I'm trying hard to get budgets for promoting, in order to promote research for our ministry. So we can base our policy on science as much as we can. Today, I would like to focus on research that we have done in looking into consumers' behavior in relation to green buildings. There is a division in our ministry that is responsible to the subject of planning, but also within that division, they are promoting green building. Before I start that, I would like to mention a few things about Israel. The population of Israel with respect to the rest of the world is very small, 0.1%. It's about 8 million people residing in Israel. 0.25 of creation of global greenhouse gas emissions. The potential of influence of global climate change on Israel far surpasses Israel's ability to influence the global climate by reducing greenhouse gases. So nevertheless, we do have to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, but Israel should also invest its effort in climate change adaptation. Some of the measures will be obviously subjects related to green building, where green building is perceived as adaptation, but also mitigation. Climate change adaptation is necessary to reduce impacts today, but also for the reduction of future sensitivity as well. A bit about the climate in Israel in relation to climate change, not about the climate as is, but the delta that we see in recent years, and we can register it under changes in the climate. So first, we do see our Israeli meteorological services do see changes in temperature. We see a rise in average annual temperature of 0.4 centigrades per decade. This is what is predicted for Israel. And this is a lot. That means more cooling, more need for water. So again, we are using desalination, so it's more energy for desalinations. This is, at the bottom line, it's more energy for everybody. Israel, as it is, it's a very hot country, and we have 8 months a year of hot temperature. So having a temperature increase is going to be a tremendous impact on our energy sectors because of increasing use. We also see and predict a rise in severity and frequency of heat waves. Heat waves, we mean above 33 centigrades Celsius. We see decline in cold waves and severe cold occurrences. We do see an increase in weather uncertainty, increase, for example, for these coming months, we are unable to predict to a certain degree the rainfall, and therefore it's very, very difficult to plan our agricultural sector. An article on that issue was just in the news, in Israeli news yesterday. We also see an increase in average heat load of 0.7 degrees centigrade per decade, decrease in precipitation. It's not as significant, however, in the northeastern part of the country, northeast to Lake Tiberias or Sea of Galilee, we do anticipate 10% decrease per decade in rainfall. We do see an increase in dry period. We see an increase in extreme weather events. A few years ago, we had 5 days of snow in Jerusalem, in some other areas in the country. We were not prepared for that. And climate belt moving northward, that has an impact also on biodiversity, of course. So this is just on a nutshell, regarding the climate change impact. Green building in urban planning was one of the subjects that we looked into when we established a team working on climate change adaptation that was composed of 100 scientists and representative of the public sectors. I will not go through that because I will not be talking about urban planning today. I just want to give more emphasis on green building, so I will just skip this one. The building sector is recognized, obviously, as the sector with most potential for delivering significant and cost-effective greenhouse gas emission reduction. That was clearly said in many, many research and papers recently in UNEP's 2013. Meeting the NDCs, the national determinants contributions, must include effort towards energy efficiency gains in the building sectors, And here I'm talking about new buildings and obviously on existing buildings which need retrofitting. When you come out and ask people, and this is an example from a paper from 2008 by Nelson, when you come out and ask about the benefits, there is a list of benefits, and for the sake of time, I will not repeat it, but besides greenhouse gas emission reduction, we have benefits of noise reduction, efficient use of natural resources, and most of you are probably familiar with the list of benefits, or you can just read it on your own. So there are many, many benefits that people recognize. And the question is, are they seeking green houses, green apartments? So what we're trying to see is where and who are the buyers. I mean, where are they? How can we profile them? Can we characterize them? What is the willingness to pay for green building? Are they willing to pay the extra money for green buildings? I just looked briefly on other research that was done by Bonin and Oppenheim from 2008, and I mentioned McKinsey's Companies Global Survey that looked into more than 7,000, 8,000 almost consumers at 8 major economies. And they tried to look, if you are a pro-environment, would you be also showing not just your intention to be for the environment, but would you actually walk the talk? Would you act? So 87% of people that are concerned with the environment and the social impact of their purchases, any green purchases that could be, said that 87% of the people said that they are concerned. But when you come into the question if they are actually already done so, they've bought the green products, only 33% said yes. Perhaps time has passed since the survey was taken, and with awareness it has increased. But those are usually the relative participation. Also, when you look in other surveys, for example, the 2000 chain store survey that looked at 822 US consumers, they found out that 25% bought green products other than organic food or energy efficient lighting. And anyway, organic food, most people buy it for health reasons. So there are lots of evidence saying again and again that maybe you're saying that you are concerned with the environment, but you're not necessarily acting upon that. So if you're saying that you are pro-environment, and if so, and if you are pro-climate, would you actually make the move and try to retrofit your house and buy a green building house? Well, okay, I will move quickly to research that was done in Israel. So we were trying to look if there is any green market, a building market, but what's happening with the demand for green buildings, what's happening with the supply. You also need somebody to build that. Is it just an intention, or there is some real action? Can we characterize the people who are be interesting? What is the profile of potential green building buyers? Are consumers willing to pay for that, and do they actually, as I said before, walk the talk? So one of we've done in 2013 a consumer behavior survey where we found that 56% of those intended to purchase housing knew what is green building, or at moderate or even a higher level. This 50%, from this 50% or more, this was 50% more than 3 years before that. We also see that an increase in green buildings awareness was also among non-buyers. So people were not buying that, or also were aware of that, and that increased from 40% in 2009 to 49%. Most potential buyers recognize the benefits that I mentioned before. 53% were willing to pay at least 3,000 euro, and of those, more than half were willing to pay at least 7,000. Claims that green building is not a significant consideration for home buyers. In Israel, the Israeli standard for green building is voluntary, and it exists since 2005. It was revised twice, in 2011 and 2016. And now we accept both standards, both revisions are acceptable in order to get certification for green building. But on the other hand, we see very little actually action. 280 buildings were built so far with the Israeli standards. 50 buildings were using foreign standards. In the pipeline, we see 700 more in the process, mostly residential, but we can see some offices, schools, and very marginal related to tourism. 60% of the total national electricity is consumed by residential and by commercial sector. They are responsible on, that represent also 33% of Israel's CO2 emissions. Hence, there is a need to really deal with green building. We have actually commissioned in the last 4 years almost 25 research projects. There are many more on the pipeline. This is a list of the subjects that we are interested in exploring. I will just not read it. One of the research that is being going on now, it's in the work in progress. It's trying to find out the willingness to pay for green in residential housing and non-green housing. We are trying to create a reliable profiling of green building consumers and finding the willingness to pay. What we learned is that company wants to identify the pro-environmental purchasing behavior among consumers, environmental awareness and consciousness impact consumers' purchasing decision. However, the socio-demographic and personality indicators have limited success in profiling the pro-environmental purchasing behavior. So we are trying to expand on that and to see if we can find out more about that. There is another research that I will mention briefly, where we seek to understand consumers' preferences regarding not just green building, but about sustainable urbanism. We have a data of 500 potential apartments buyer. Here we emphasize, as I said, not a green building, but the green buildings, but sustainability parameters. So we looked at the type of the buildings, the number neighborhood with local parks, low prices, and walking distance from commercial centers and public transportation, and at least 2 spots that they requested. The last one that I'll mention, this is my last slide, is another project, research project that we're doing, done by Akron and Portnov from the University of Haifa. It's still work in progress, and here we are looking at how can we encourage green buildings by providing incentives to sector's decision, where the sector decisions maker, where we looked at 3 decision makers: the consumers themselves, the architects, which have a huge impact on the quality of buildings, and also developers. And what we found out when we were asking the researchers asking consumer, among 400 consumers, they are willing to pay 7% more on relative to regular conventional house. They say that they are saving on expenditure and future maintenance require. They want to see immediate government financial incentives like tax breaks, etc. They perceived it as an environmental protection measures and the future increase in assets value. When we went to ask architects how much they're willing to pay more or to invest more when they are planning these apartments, they said about 9%, and they came and saying, well, it's more we are protecting an innovation, and that's the way they'll to look at that. Developers said that the willingness to pay is probably about 12%, but they want to see an immediate return from the government because they would not, I mean, they are the ones that are competing and they want to be able to sell it. So relative to other conventional apartments, they are worried that it will not be marketable. Therefore, the policy has to be obviously tailor-made to each of the incentives the government gives or the packages for incentives has to be tailor-made according to those decision makers. Thanks. By the way, this is our site, and we have the site in English and in Arabic as well. Speak down. Got it. Thank you.
Okay. For our next speaker, we have Mr. David Hochschild of the California Energy Commission. David was appointed to the California Energy Commission by Governor Jerry Brown in February 2013. He fills the environmental position on the 5-member commission. Commissioner Hochschild's career has spanned public service, environmental advocacy, and the private sector. He first got involved in the solar energy field in San Francisco as a special assistant to Mayor Willie Brown, where he launched a citywide $100 million initiative to put solar panels on public buildings. He went on to co-found the Vote Solar Initiative, promoting solar policies at the local, state, and federal level. Consortium of leading solar manufacturers, and a commissioner at the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. Please join me in welcoming David to the podium.
Thank you, Laurel, and thank you to Laurel and her team for bringing us all together today, and for the good people of Morocco for hosting us so generously in your beautiful country this week. So I just want to be honest, this week for me as an American has been the toughest week I've had in over 10 years. It's a very sad week for many of us in California. First, with climate change, that we may have a president who wants to go in a very different direction, but also as a father of 2 daughters, I want to live in a country that respects women and celebrates women. And so it has been a very, very tough week. But let me just say, with respect to climate change, the message from California is that we're not putting our foot on the brake, we're actually putting our foot on the accelerator, and we're going to go faster towards our clean energy goals than ever before. In fact, the election in California, our state legislature became even greener. So what I want to do is walk you through a little bit about what's happening. That's some good news, and then we can have a conversation from there. So let me just start with this. Last year in the United States, 65% of the new electric generation capacity added in our country came from renewable energy, wind, solar, geothermal. The largest of all, the single biggest new source of electric generation was solar. Bigger than gas, bigger than coal, bigger than nuclear, bigger than wind, right? This is, solar was, 0.1% of the energy supply, a few years ago. Now it's the number one source being added, right? So really a good news story. And on the other side of that, what's happening with coal in America is amazing. So 5 years ago, coal represented 52% of the United States electricity portfolio. Okay, so today it's about 30% and falling. But what's interesting, if you look at the market cap, the market valuation of the 4 big coal companies that supply almost all the coal in the US, Peabody, Arch, Alpha, and Cloud Peak Energy. So their combined market cap has fallen by 99% in the last 5 years. Okay, these companies are worth 1% of the value they had 5 years ago. That's the steepest decline in value in the history of the world's energy industry. Okay, and so the question is really what comes next. The era of coal is coming to an end in the United States, and I think soon in the rest of the world. So in California, the good news is that the grand California clean energy experiment is working. Okay, so since 2001, our GDP has grown by 28%, our emissions have fallen by 8%. And what you see is, as our GDP goes up and our populations go up, our greenhouse emissions are going down, our greenhouse emissions per capita are going down very steeply. And if you think back to the mythology that was propagated by the critics of clean energy politics, there are basically three things that they said would happen, three calamities that would happen in California if we went big on renewable energy and clean energy policy. It would collapse our economy, okay? Well, what's happened? The California economy has actually grown faster than the national economy in the US. They said it would raise unemployment. So what's happened? We've actually cut unemployment in half the last 5 years. And they said it would cause rolling blackouts and our grid would go. We haven't had any statewide rolling blackouts since we started these policies. One important thing in the United States federally, our federal subsidies for energy have heavily favored fossil fuels. And I think people often ask a question about this, but they ask the wrong question, which is what's the subsidy this year? Actually, the right question, I think, is what's the all-in subsidy since subsidies began? And there's basically three differences between, sorry, this slide doesn't show up so well, but three differences between subsidies for fossil fuels and subsidies for renewables. The subsidies for fossil fuels have been around much longer. So the oil depletion allowance started in 1926. They're much more numerous for fossil fuels, and they typically don't expire. So like the oil depletion allowance continues in perpetuity, but the wind and solar subsidies, which were just implemented 10 years ago, they expire in 4 or 5 years, right? So in a way, the whole playing field is uneven, and what you're seeing at the state level in states like California and Hawaii and Oregon and New York is trying to rebalance that playing field, okay? In California, the first policy that we started off with was a 20% renewable energy mandate by 2013. Okay, that was the first mandate. Then we increased it. When Governor Brown came into office, the first law he signed was a 33% renewable mandate by 2020. And then just over a year ago, he signed the next law, which is mandating 50% renewable energy by 2030. Now think about that. That is a very important turning point, because after that point, fossil fuels become the alternative energy and renewables become mainstream. And that's exactly where we're headed. And this policy cannot be changed by a Trump administration. This is a state law, all right? And in fact, right now we're on track not just to hit that goal, but to exceed it, okay? That's where California's going right now. We have installed today, as you can see, more renewable energy than any other state in the United States. Texas is second because of wind. They've done a great job with wind power in Texas, and our economy is booming. The other thing we've emphasized very heavily is energy efficiency. And just to give you an example, the blue line shows the energy used per capita of California. The red line is the United States. And about 40 years ago, we implemented very strict energy efficiency standards for new buildings and for new appliances, refrigerators and televisions, et cetera. And here's what happened. We got all these savings in industrial, commercial, and residential. And today, we are using half the energy per capita of the rest of the country. So if you build a new building in California, you have to have, double pane glass and high efficiency lighting and all the rest of it. And that has really made a difference. That's the number one priority. Yeah. Also as an example with refrigerators, this is the first appliance that we regulated. And you can see the energy use of refrigerators is going up. We put the standard in place and the energy use came down. And at the same time, the price came down and the size of the refrigerator went up. So it's a good example, I think, of how smart government policy can work. If you look at the cost more generally with what I'd call the foundational technologies of a clean energy future, you see the cost of wind and solar PV and utility scale solar and storage and LEDs all heading very steeply downward. This is really good news. And just remember that over time, finite resources like fossil fuels tend to become more expensive as the resource dwindles. Technology is just the opposite. As you grow it, you get to scale and prices come down, right? So that principle is at work here. With renewable energy, we are scaling very quickly. We had just 12% renewable energy on the grid in 2008. Today, we're just over 25%. And I want to take you guys on a California clean energy tour. This is the largest thin film solar PV project in the world. I just dedicated this about 2 years ago. It's just north of our border with Mexico, 550 megawatts. It's about half the generation of a city like San Francisco. This was the world's largest silicon PV project. It's now number 3, also in California. We have the world's largest solar thermal tower plant. I know there's a few of these in Israel as well. This is the Ivanpah project. And the world's largest solar thermal trough plant as well, the SEGS project. Yes, yes. And we have also the world's largest geothermal power plant, the geysers up in Napa, and the world's largest wind project as well. Our largest factory operating in the state of California today is an electric car factory, Tesla. Okay, this is an interesting story. This used to be a General Motors factory. They closed their doors in 2010. Tesla came in, bought the factory, and now they employ more people at this factory than when it was a conventional car factory. And we have about 250,000 electric vehicles on the roads in California today. One other good thing has been the trends with clean energy jobs. So last year, for the first time, we now have more people working in the solar industry alone in the state of California than who work for all of our utilities combined. So a real success story with jobs. And we're also pushing on energy storage. We have a mandate to do 1.3 gigawatts of energy storage. This is the Tesla battery factory making the batteries for cars and people's homes. This one's in Nevada, but just as an example, this one factory is the second largest building in the world that they're building. And the capacity of this lithium ion battery factory is actually going to be greater than the entire lithium ion battery market globally. So let me just wrap up here. Just a few more victories. The president just put solar panels on the White House. Governor Brown just put solar on the governor's mansion. And we're moving towards electrification of almost everything. Electric buses, battery electric buses. That one has a 350-mile range. This is the new Proterra bus electric motorcycle. That's the new Tesla and so forth. And we have about 9,000 electric vehicle charging stations in the US. Stanford University just got off natural gas for all their space heating, all their water heating. They're moving to clean electricity. We're seeing trends with all electric homes with no gas lines being built. And major California companies, Google, Apple, Facebook, have now committed to do 100% renewable energy. And we're building high-speed rail as well, which is going to be 100% renewable energy as well. And then just to remember how quickly this change can happen. It took General Motors almost a century to become a $50 billion company. Tesla started in 2003, and they're already at 34 billion. So you can kind of play that out over time. And you can see, I think Tesla's going to end up being more valuable than GM. And of course, with investment, because of our policies, we've attracted more clean tech investment into California than all of Europe and all of China combined. So let me just close with this, okay? I think the analogy between fossil fuels and smoking is a very good one. What happened with smoking was that in World War II, a generation of men were given cigarettes every day for daily rations in the army. They came home, and you had half the country smoking. President Kennedy smoked, Marilyn Monroe smoked. It was doctors did ads for TV. Then the science came out that smoking causes cancer, and the response of the tobacco industry was to go from making one product, cigarettes, to making two. They made cigarettes and doubt, and they spent $100 million on junk science to distort the truth that smoking caused cancer. But what happened next is very instructive, okay? The same thing's happening with the junk science and climate. Eventually, the truth got accepted by the public, and there was this cascade of policies, health warnings on cigarette packages, increasing the cigarette tax, banning ads for on TV for cigarettes, banning smoking on airplanes and sales to minors in bars and restaurants. And today in the United States, the smoking rate has fallen to 15%, projected to go to 12% by 2020. Right? It's really one of the biggest public health success stories in our country's history. And I think we're going to follow the same path with fossil fuels. I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, David. And now I'd like to welcome Dr. Christina Tirado from the University of California, Los Angeles. Christina Tirado has been working on climate and environmental change, sustainable development, food and health issues with the World Health Organization, governmental and non-governmental organizations, and universities worldwide for 20 years. Currently, she serves as advisor for the Pan American Health Organization and is adjunct professor at the School of Public Health at the University of California, Los Angeles. Cristina is moderator of the UN Standing Committee on Nutrition's Working Group on Climate Change and Nutrition, contributing author to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's latest assessment report, and she is a health advocate at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Conferences of the Parties. And now I'd like to welcome Cristina to the stage. So I'm actually going to introduce Rick Worthington right now as we find Christina's presentation. Dr. Richard Worthington from Pomona College. So Richard Worthington's teaching, scholarly work, and political activism all focus on the intersection of science, democracy, and social change. He's especially interested in how science and technology can be shaped by common citizens rather than by corporations and the military, with the goal of developing policies and actions that will aid in the transition to an equitable, democratic, and ecologically sustainable society. Richard is the author of Rethinking Globalization, Production, Politics, and Actions, and other works in science, policy, environmental issues, and politics in the Americas. Most recently, he was the U.S. coordinator of Worldwide Views on Global Warming, the first global citizen policy consultation in history, in which citizens in 38 countries deliberated on the policy questions later addressed at the 2009 UN Climate Summit in Copenhagen. Today, he is principal investigator of a National Science Foundation-funded project to study the process and outcomes of worldwide views. So we'll welcome Rick to the podium, and then Cristina will be our last speaker. And then we'll have a little bit of time for audience Q&A before we go on to refreshments. So without further ado, I will welcome either Rick or Cristina. Okay, so Cristina, welcome.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, we had it right here. But, yes, but we could not see it. Thank you for the presentation. This panel today, and when Laurel asked me to prepare this presentation, I was hoping to be able to do a comparison of several cities in the Mediterranean and other cities in which I had been living, and that produced me a shock when I arrived in 2006 in LA. I was coming from 40 years of biking to the school or biking to work. And when I arrived to LA, I could not understand what was going on. I could not find the places where you cross the street because I could not find the cure because they are not. I could not find things that I thought that they should be there, and they were not there because nobody uses them. Second, when I went to the public transport, first it was complicated. I have to be waiting for hours to get a bus. And when I got into the bus, I realized that it was only me, 4 European teachers, and many homelesses. So that was then, and to tell you the truth, things have started to change little by little, and now LA is in a way that is completely different to when I arrived. It's like they are trying to get into this path, and they are investing very heavily in this. So let me show you. Okay, it's working. Okay. In LA, we have the typical problems of climate change of a Mediterranean city, but basically, what is more common to all these problems is the higher average of temperatures, less precipitation, droughts, worse air quality, but worse air quality could be one of the worst air qualities of most of the Mediterranean cities that I know or I have been living with, and more acres burned by wildlife and wildfires, and this is special because of the particular geography of LA, because it's surrounded by many forests. And they also have a greater incidence of vector-borne diseases, which in fact is still under control and lower than other Mediterranean cities that are in the world that have been affected in different ways because they are in other continents, basically, and they have other sources. Like, for example, many vector-borne diseases come from Africa, and it's a major difference. The facility of these vector-borne diseases arrive from Africa, that to arrive to Los Angeles. So those are the differences and the similarities. When we see heat waves, we are having heat waves even during winter in LA, and we are experiencing winter mortality due to heat waves. So UCLA has done a study looking at heat waves, and they have estimated that by 2040 or 2060, we will have, in areas that are already very badly affected by heat waves and very hot days, they may have even a worse situation. So these areas where you see that, okay, just 1 second, sorry. Those areas where we see that are already affected by long periods of hot days are the prioritary areas where we have to work in terms of urban design and improving the green spaces and of the whole neighborhoods. So, for example, in the California heat wave in 2006, we could see for the first time, and it was the year that I arrived, we saw that it was more than 1,000 excess of hospitalizations and more than 16 excess of visits to the emergency room. That was quite overwhelming. And more of the emergency room visits for heat-related illnesses, acute kidney failure and cardiovascular diseases, they were related with diabetes, electrolyte imbalance, nephritis, and other issues related to kidney inflammatory. But in relation to the mortality, we have, make in the health sector this joke that it's very difficult that when you attribute mortality, nobody has ever died with a death certificate that says that has been died because of heat wave. So that's the attribution, the ultimate attribution is quite difficult. And the situation that we have is that if we have more heat, the heat impact is affecting air quality, and we are getting a greater creation of ground level ozone, more temperature inversions and more wildfires. And the days that we have Santana winds and wildfires in Los Angeles is unbearable. I mean, it's absolutely unbearable. You go in the streets, you cannot breathe, you know, everything gets dry, and you think, okay, I am in a situation that at least, you know, I can adapt. But there are many kids and many poor communities that cannot do that. So the days of the wildfires is particularly, you know, we see problems of asthma and other respiratory illnesses. We see this displacement and trauma. We have been evacuated when I was living in Topanga a couple of times. And there are total interruption of public services, and you cannot come back to work. There are also problems of ophthalmological problems that we are starting to see as well. Then the California, Los Angeles County has been working very hard trying to adapt, and they have created these 5-point plans to reduce the health impacts of climate change, to inform, promote, provide, build, and adopt. And what is more important is that now we are going to have a sustainability plan in Los Angeles. The county and the city is committed to plant more trees. There is a tree committee. And we have this California and Los Angeles plan that was not initially focused on environment, economy, it was only focused on environment, economy, and equity. But what is bringing is the co-benefits that the health sector is asking from any actions in urban settings. Like, for example, we are installing more than 1,000 new public available electric vehicles with charging stations through the city, including more than 100 in the city property. We are committed to have 0 days of air pollution by 2025. And by 2035, 25% of the cars should be electric. Same thing, similarly, in terms of housing, we are starting the construction of 17,000 new units of housing that are closer to the transit that is being built right now in Los Angeles. And this will reduce the number of rent burden households, at least in a 15% by 2013. Similarly, there is a huge investment, amazing, on rail, buses, lines, pedestrian, bike safety, and complete neighborhoods that provide more mobility options and reduce vehicle miles traveled. And, you know, this could be totally a dream that by 2035, the city wants that at least 50% of all the journeys will be on foot, by bike, or using public transport. And think that all this brings benefits to health. This is what your doctor will tell you, you know, when you don't feel well, you know, go, take a walk, breathe, relax. We are preparing the population for natural disasters, and we decrease our vulnerability, you know, installing from cool roofs, or, you know, permeable pavements, and by increasing green spaces and the canopy. Then, just to finish, there are plans to increase the amount of these green areas and trees and urban agriculture that are at a certain distance of the population. And it is expected that by 2025, the LA's average of walk score will increase by 75, which is absolutely the best that can happen to our health. And just to finish, and the common goal is to reduce the number of annual childhood asthma-related emergency rooms visits in LA in the most contaminated neighborhoods to less than 14% in children. by 2025, and to increase the amount of food supplies and gardens in agriculture, urban agriculture that we have in LA. Yeah, thanks a lot.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for hanging in this far, this long, I should say. As Laurel indicated in her introduction, I come at things, primarily, better not be expressive up here, primarily from an interest in citizen participation. Oh, and I just lost something. Oh, I hit something and got a different slide. Sorry about that.
Oh no,
This is okay.
Yeah.
Okay, get that over there. No, I won't be confused. I come at things mostly in terms of citizen participation, and I'm talking today, especially in regard to resilience, defined up here. But if you think about the sorts of things we've just heard about Los Angeles and other places, a lot of resilience is going to be required in the years ahead, responding to challenges of the sort that have been laid out. And my basic argument is that citizen participation is going to be a critical component of that resilience. And that's what I've been working on with respect to climate change policy at a global level for the last 5 or 6 years. So a way of thinking about this is in terms of public engagement, which is basically a way of getting ordinary people involved in discourses with policymakers so that they can learn from one another, a little bit different from one-way communication processes. And when people talk about public engagement, they usually think of things like one-way communication, the government sending out information to educate the citizens, for example. But the ones down at the bottom here, especially deliberative democracy, where ordinary citizens come together with background information to consider a policy issue together with their own peers, and then provide the results of that informed consideration to the policymakers. That sort of information actually policymakers don't have. They have information from stakeholders, from organized constituencies of all sorts. That's a good thing. But informed opinions of ordinary people are pretty scarce because the main source of data on that is public opinion polls, and people don't get briefed in advance of the public opinion polls. So this whole deliberative democracy arguably, or at least it aims to provide a more informed voice, which is what's missing. So the project I've been working on since 2009 is called Worldwide Views. It was invented by the Danish Board of Technology. And the basic idea, I won't go through all the points on the slide there, but the basic idea is to get people together around the world in their own countries in groups of 100, but at tables of 6 to 8 with all this advanced information, and talk about the policy issues that will be on an upcoming COP. The first one was done in advance of the Copenhagen Climate Summit in 2009, and the most recent one was in advance of the Paris Summit. So there have been 3, well, that's a rationale, I'll skip that in the interest of time. There have been 3 of these projects. I just mentioned 2, but the main thing you can get from this slide is that the scale of this activity has grown to where in 2015, in June, before the Paris Climate Summit, there were close to 10,000 citizens participated in these deliberations where they talked about all the policy issues that were on the agenda for the Paris Climate Summit, and they were in 97 sites in 76 different countries. And that gives you a sense of the global nature of this undertaking. That's the map of countries where people's participated in worldwide views on climate and energy. These are just photos of people around the world: Boston, Vietnam, Ethiopia, India, and Los Angeles, where we did one in 2009. and just some of the results of what people actually have to say when you compile all the information of what they come to in the course of the day. For the first global warming deliberation, which was in 2009, I'll focus especially on the ones that were a little bit surprising to me. Well, especially punish non-complying countries. Everyone seemed to think, not everyone, but large majorities of people worldwide, without a whole lot of variation, thought that the people coming to the leaders coming to the Copenhagen Climate Summit should cut a climate deal there. They really thought that was important. And they actually thought that that deal should also have mechanisms for holding the parties accountable. That just surprised me, honestly. And another theme that wasn't quite as surprising was just the idea that the technology for making this transition should be made available to everyone. You've got a lot of countries, as you saw on the map from the Global South, that would be interested in technology transfer as well as developing their own technologies, but wanting support for that. Here from Worldwide Views on Climate and Energy in 2015, the question was, for you, measures to fight climate change, and then the first answer, roughly 26% of people, equally in developed and less developed countries, their answer was, the measures to fight climate change are mostly a threat to our quality of life. The second one, however, was a surprise. Second choice, 66%, are mostly an opportunity to improve our quality of life. Now, I haven't read that in the newspaper. I don't know if you have, but I haven't seen that in the public discourse that most people have access to. And maybe I just missed it, although I think I've been paying sufficient attention. And another one that was interesting was just about a carbon tax. And I won't go through it, but there are three choices, three variations of carbon tax that somebody might support, or they might oppose a carbon tax. And when you add them up, the three variations of support for a carbon tax was close to, I think it was 85 or 90% when you add those top three bars up. And again, well, this one only shows the whole world, but again, relatively similar responses from different countries. So what are the achievements? I'll focus on the last two. Policy discourses have been expanded by this because that voice that is missing has actually become present at the COPs. Initially, for the first one in 2009, you would barely be able to measure it because there was so much a tsunami of information, and the organizers of the project just didn't have experience with building networks and the like to get these results to the various delegates. But by 2015, there was considerable, well, I've got a chart, so I'll show you. And then there's another achievement, appropriation, which I'll talk about in a second. But on this chart, it just lists things ranging from 3,000 to 4,000 reports picked up at climate summits to hundreds of bilateral briefings of delegations at the climate summit. And then toward the bottom, actually, the results being propagated in the sense of things like the head of the International Climate Action Network starting to cite the results in press conferences and things of that sort. The Secretary General of the Convention on Biodiversity and the Convention on UNFCCC also participating in these things and actually co-sponsoring them. We do have a little bit of information, not so much because most of this information is quantitative. We have a little bit on qualitative recommendations from citizens. Here you see several. The point I want to make about these is that they're consistent with what people said quantitatively. They're not very different from what people said in general. So, and that relates to a criticism of this process. On the one hand, it's very high level. It's focused on global issues. On the other hand, the participants themselves say, it would be nice to be able to get this closer to our homes, okay? So that's where participation in climate change, and in particular things like MC4, if I've got the right acronym, come into play. Because participation is important for direct action as well as policy implementation, and that's where we are right now. But how do you do that? How do you get that, especially to be more than just your own country or your own city, but not global, where things are these totally high-level issues? Well, I think things like networks like the MC4 network are a perfect fit for that, and so I think that's the agenda for the future. Or one agenda, I should say, for the direction that this sort of citizen participation can take in the future. Thanks very much.
Okay, let's give a huge round of applause to our panelists. Okay, we have a couple minutes left, so I just want to open it up to audience questions. If you have questions for any of the panelists or all of them or a subset, please ask. All right, let's start with Rob.
So I live in Los Angeles now after living 20 years in Perth. When I first moved to Perth, in Western Australia, it was described as the climate of Southern California mixing hats. So I'm very interested in exploring how you think the networks can collaborate.
So how can networks collaborate? Thanks for that question.
I'll take a crack at it.
All right.
The entire process that I just described is critically dependent on networks, because how did the Danish Board of Technology that invented this whole process and then partnered with others, how did they manage to get 97 deliberations on the same day at different sites around the world? Well, for starters, they have to build partners at each local site who will put it on. And that's called the Worldwide Views Alliance. And there are more than 160 organizations, NGOs, universities, some government offices that are part of that Worldwide Views Alliance. And many of them have participated in putting on more than one Worldwide Views. But then what do those people who participate do? I'll give you a concrete example. Uruguay participated in putting on the first Worldwide Views, and they appropriated it. That was one of the bullets I skipped, and used it for their own purposes. Apparently, Argentina is planning on building a nuclear power plant, and they wanted to have a democratic citizen deliberation on that process. So they put one on, different design from this one, but still participatory and deliberative. They put one on in Uruguay. It was the first time that anything like that had ever been done in Uruguay. So that's one way in which networks work. We were doing an interview yesterday with someone from Mauritania who put on a climate change deliberation in 2015, and then became part of this project that we saw over in the Green Zone, where 100 citizen-driven adaptation projects were funded by the French government, modest funding, but incredible stuff. And the whole point was to build on the existing network of people to go directly to climate solutions driven from the bottom up.
Fantastic. Do we have any other?
Yeah, I just add to that. My agency, the Energy Commission, we host about one delegation a week from other countries, mostly interested in renewable energy and efficiency. But we went on a delegation visit to Australia because Australia is way ahead of the United States and California on drought response, and actually had the same water use per person per day as California in 1999. You had your 14-year drought, and now it's you cut water use in half. And California has a lot to learn. And that I was there in Australia actually twice this year looking at that, and we have learned that I'm stealing as many good ideas as I can. So I'm a big believer in those direct exchanges.
Yeah, if I can reply very quickly. In fact, recently I was talking with WHO Europe and with the European Commission because I was mentioning that that LA now is starting to fly, but we have a generation from my age and even younger that will not change. I mean, they are taking their cars. There's no way that they will not keep being the same that they have been. So there is a question of new generation, and learning in the school, but we don't have time for the older generation to keep telling me, no, I am going, 4 people in my house, 4 cars. Well, Then we have been thinking about the possibility of doing a comparative study with the European cities in the European Commission, including LA, and looking at the drivers. What are the drivers that make a person, a population, a community to change the fastest? So the fastest, and looking what is economically, more efficient, to try to put this to speed up. And one of them, by the way, are the walls in the bike lines. If you have them, people will bike. If you don't have them, people will not bike.
Does anyone else want to add anything? Okay. Are there any more questions? Yes. Is there a microphone floating around? Oh, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ruth
Oh,
Spencer.
I don't think it's on.
Antigua.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, it's on.
It's on?
Okay, for citizen engagement to take place, there needs to be a flow of information. In my part of the world, I'm from the Caribbean, most of the information goes to government departments. They have focal points. And I work in a couple Caribbean islands. Fortunate for Antigua, our focal point and our Department of Environment has legislation that says NGOs, local community groups must be involved in policy, project deliberation. So we have information, but in some of the countries, the information stays with the government. So look at the NDCs. How do the population know what our NDCs are? Right. How do they respond? Because remember, implementation is in the communities. That's where the action is. So probably in the developed countries, you can source the information very good, but there's a need in some of the islands for the information to flow from the governments where it comes to, that's where UNFCCC information, all the convention goes to focal points, and it's their responsibility to send it out. But if you don't have that legislation and that good network, on the island, it stays in silos. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to respond? Christina?
Yes, thank you for that question. In fact, I have been working a lot in the Caribbean in the last years, and but I have been working with WHO. And I can tell you that the offices of WHO have a lot of information on co-benefits to health and to reduce emissions from actions such as the actions that I have discussed in my presentation, like improving urban organization. So go to these offices and you can get the information quickly. Thank you.
I completely agree that it's critical for the information to get out. I think on top of that, and this is one of the principles of deliberative democracy, people have to get access to it and they have to have the opportunity to deliberate on it, preferably together, to figure it out together. And then the government needs to be committed to listening to what they say, not necessarily doing what they say, but at least hearing what they have to say. And so that's what these deliberative processes aim for. They vary in their level of success. It's a work in progress, but it's critical that it not just be information out, it's also got to be views back to the authorities.
Fantastic. Anyone else? Okay, I think we have time for one more question. Yeah. Here's the microphone.
Hi, my name is Atia. I'm with American University. My question is more directed at Dr. Netanyahu. I'm wondering if the regional cooperation in the Middle Eastern region can be strengthened from the projects that you're talking about with green building. For example, in Jordan, there's been a lot of green building initiatives as well. I'm wondering if there's a platform for information and knowledge sharing between the different regions in the Middle East to really help support you and also support other countries that may not have the same capacities and financial stability that Israel has.
Well, the answer it is possible. It's obviously changed during according to the political situations. But a few years ago, we had 10 consecutive years of collaboration between Israelis, Palestinians, and Jordanian, and it was supported by Germany. There was by the Ministry of Science, and they actually supported 10 years of climate change adaptation, looking into the impact on water and obviously on agriculture. Many good things came out of that, not just collaborative work on studies and papers and journal articles, etc., but actually there was some field studies, etc. But that was 10 years, $17 million were invested, and unfortunately 4 years ago it ended. There are some NGOs that are working together. The Friends of Earth of the Middle East, or Friends of Earth. So there are some ad hoc projects being supported through the European Commission, like program like LIFE and things like that. But it's not necessarily followed. There's not necessarily support by the government.
All right, thank you all. We'll have a little reception outside. Let's give a huge round of applause to our panelists.
Oh, sure. Yeah, good idea. Someone out there to take it.
Should we stay there?
Over here.
Right here?
Yeah.
I don't know. On the podium? Okay.
Find my bag. Yeah.
Oh,
Not with tears, you know, but to live in one way and to come back to ourselves. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Sure. Should we get all the MC4 folks? Hi. You're welcome. Thank you. Yael,